week 12 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few defense DST units I would start. The first one, the Baltimore Ravens. I know the Ravens, they've been banged up this season. Their defense really hasn't been that playmaking defense like we've seen for many years in the past. But right here, they got a good matchup, in my opinion, versus the Cleveland Browns. And right here, Baker Mayfield, he's not a great quarterback this season. He's making a lot of mistakes. He's taking a decent amount of sacks. And Baltimore at home here on Sunday Night Football, I think can make a few plays in this division matchup. And I definitely could see it being a defensive type of game here. So right here, Baltimore in this one, I think they could get 7 to 10 fantasy points. And over the last few weeks, they've played a little bit better. Week 10 in Miami, 16 points allowed, 4 sacks. And week 11 in Chicago, 13 points allowed, 3 sacks and a fumble recovery. So right here, week 12 versus Cleveland, I think they're good for 3 or 4 sacks, anywhere 17 to 20 points allowed, and maybe a turnover or two. But I would start them this week. The next defense is the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles here, their defense is started to play better over the last few weeks. And they versus a New York Giant team here in week 12 that give up the 10th most fantasy points to defensive units on the season. So the last few games here for Philly, week 10 at Denver, 13 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery, a block kick, and a touchdown. And week 11 versus the Saints, 29 points allowed, but a lot of garbage time in that one. 2 windows and a pick six by Slay in that game. So right here at the Giants, we saw Daniel Jones turn the ball over a few times in Monday Night Football versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneer defense that really hasn't been good this season. And they do get to the quarterback as well. So I think Philly in this one, they're similar with Daniel Jones, playing him in the division. And I think in this ball game, they're going to get a couple turnovers and a few sacks and hold the score to a decent range here. So I think Philly is a defense I would start this week, and they're available in 81% of fantasy leagues. The next defense is the Chicago Bears, so the Bears have a great matchup this week on Thanksgiving Day at the Detroit Lions that give up the 4th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So right here, we don't know if we're going to see Jared Goff at the starter. If not, Blau is going to be the starter in this one. And right here, I think this Bear team, coming off a tough loss in Week 11 versus Baltimore, they're going to get back to the basics and try to win this ball game with their defensive unit. And Detroit here, they can't score the football, even though they play hard, and they've been in some close games this season. But right here, I could see a division matchup where it's a low-scoring ball game in the mid-teens to low 20s in this one. So I think the Bears in this game can make a few plays, get a few sacks, and they're definitely a unit I would start this week. And they're available as well right now in a good amount of fantasy leagues at 74%. The next defense is the Buffalo Bills. So I know the Bills came off a shocking loss and giving up a 41-point ball game to the Indianapolis Colts. But I think this week here, week 12 at the Saints, they bounce back on Thanksgiving Day here. The only threat in that offense really right now is Alvin Kamara, and he's definitely not 100%, and we don't even know if he's going to play for sure in this one, because this Bill defense was lights out pretty much the whole season besides that Week 11 ball game versus Indianapolis. Week 8 versus Miami, 11 points allowed, 2 sacks and into, fumble recovery, a block kick. Week 9 at Jacksonville, 9 points allowed in that one, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. And Week 10 at the Jets, 17 points allowed, a sack, 4 interceptions, a fumble recovery in that one. So right here, after a bad ball game, I think this Bill defense, they're going to take pride in this one. This is going to be an indoor game. It's going to be nationally televised, no doubt about it, obviously, on Thanksgiving. And I think in this one, they can make Trevor Siemian turn the ball over a few times. And they definitely could grab him for a few sacks as well. So I think Buffalo gets back on the right track, and they are a defensive unit I would start this week. And the 5th and final defense I would start is the Houston Texans. So the Texans, their 1 week start, a recommendation this week here with a great matchup versus the New York Jets that give up the 2nd most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the last few games here for Houston, Week 8 versus the Rams, they got destroyed, 38 points allowed, a sack. Week 9 at the Dolphins, not a bad ball game, 17 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 windows, and 3 fumble recoveries. And Week 11, that shocking victory at Tennessee, 13 points allowed, 2 sacks, 4 windows, a fumble recovery in that one. So right here versus Joe Flacco and the Jets with Zach Wilson, whoever's going to start this game, I think they're going to go with Flacco one more time. I think the Texans could get a few sacks on Flacco. Obviously, we know his mobility isn't there. And we know this Jet team, they're prone to turnovers, either throwing interceptions or fumbling the ball. So right here, I think the Texans keep this in the mid-teens to 20s type of ball game between the two teams. And I think the Texans have a pretty good ball game in this one. And they could score anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points. So that's a few defense DST units I would start this week for week 12 of the fantasy football season.